been going very nice and slow, and I'm gonna put my foot on the pedal. We're gonna go about 60 miles an hour now. Sound good? Oh yeah.
I say sit down.
Well, we're still in the same daf. We're just gonna try to go a little faster. Okay, so here it's 384. That's the new edition.
Yeah, 384.
There's a new edition, old edition. It's
What are you doing here?
in the current edition of the book, we're on page 320. Okay. 320. Okay, we are concluding the halachas, the laws of Klisha Malachta V'Issa, which we spent many weeks on, and we are left with the final case examples to follow.
Their screen.
Where are we here? We're not anywhere right now. We're doing shilas and shuvas that are recorded in other afraim. Okay, so we're just going to do a few more questions that to cover the basis of Klisha Malachta V'Issa that we haven't fully gone into yet, and that is regarding. I want to fully. We discussed a little bit last week of electricity, electrical appliances, and I want to give a full rundown on that now. So we discussed regarding a fan last week. If you remember, we summarized that a fan is a Klisha Malachta V'Issa, may be moved towards you. It cannot be moved away from you because it's not serving a purpose unless somebody else desires to have a fan on him. Now,
Or you sit somewhere else and...
Yeah, you can do one of the tricks that we mentioned. Now the question is, are all electrical appliances, they all considered Klisha Malachta V'Issa? For example, is this watch considered Klisha Malachta V'Issa? So the truth is, a watch we already dealt with. A watch is a different promise that measures time. But in general, the question here is that do we define Klisha Malachta V'Issa only as something that is designated for doing with it a prohibited action, such as taking a hammer and banging the nail into the wall? Or do we say that even if it's not designated for a prohibited action, but its use is only made realistic, is only applicable through doing a prohibition, like plugging in the fan, plugging an electrical appliance? So on the one hand, you can say, well, since the fan is made for blowing on you, that's permitted on Shabbos to have air blow on you. There's no such issur. So therefore, it's designated for a permitted purpose. It just happens to be that it works through doing a prohibited action. So the bottom line is like this: the common consensus of the poskim, even though we don't really have a precedent that I can think of, or that they bring regarding electrical appliances, is that even if their purpose is not something of issur, nonetheless, since it only works through a prohibition, it would be considered Klisha Malachta V'Issa, as zil basar taima, go after the reason. The whole reason the sages restricted it is because you make them to do a prohibition. And if so, what's the difference if its designation is for the purpose of doing prohibition, or its designation is something that's permitted but can only be done it only works if you do a prohibition? So here we find something funny they wanted to bring up regarding the chuvas of Rabbi Moshe. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, in a few chuvas, was asked this question, and a few responses, and he answered like I said over here: since its way of working is through doing a prohibition, even though it itself is not designated for a prohibition, meaning its use is not a prohibited use, but to plug it in is prohibited, therefore it would be considered a Klisha Malachta V'Issa. Therefore he says a fan and things of the like, and thereby even seemingly a watch, would be considered a Klisha Malachta V'Issa. On the other hand, in a tshuva printed in volume 8, it's known as volume 5 in Orach Chaim of the Igros Moshe, of his tshuvas, he writes the exact opposite. That to clarify my opinion, that people have been confused about, that I wrote in previous tshuvas, electrical appliances, since their main designation is for a permitted matter, to enjoy the blowing of the air, etc., they are not. So this is revolutionary, because there's so many electrical appliances today in our homes, and if we're saying that since this air conditioner is not is not doing a prohibited act, it's just working through a prohibition, but its purpose is not for the sake of prohibition, it would therefore not be muktzah on Shabbos. And so on and so forth, you would be able to use that logic with so many different things. Maybe we can even say a phone wouldn't be muktzah according to that. If it's not something, if it's not designated for prohibition, then it wouldn't be able to be elevated to the higher level. So this is a very strange psak, because it contradicts what he wrote earlier, and especially when you write, due to the confusion of what I wrote, this is my opinion. Clearly, in the period of psakim, that's not what he wrote. So because of this and other reasons, many of the students of Rav Moshe have disassociated themselves from this volume, volume 8. And it's a little strange. It's a controversy over Rav Moshe's last 2 volumes of Tshuvos, which were printed after he passed away, as to whether they are really his or they are under the influence of other parties of interest, whoever they are. Bottom line is like this, is that I don't have an answer to this controversy. The controversy is first and foremost amongst the students of Rav Moshe. Some students, avow by it. Others say that you can't rely on it at all. But because of this, when a Tshuva of Rav Moshe is thrown around, if it's from volume 8 or volume 9, it comes with a question mark. Some things there that we cannot rely upon, as they, if Rav Moshe wanted to redact his opinion, so he could say, even though I wrote in the previous Tshuvos this and this and this, I've changed my mind. That's not what he wrote. He wrote is that all the previous Tshuvos state, this is what I'm saying. It's not true. It doesn't say that. It says that he paskins there, that it's Kli Shemalach D'Le'issa. You find that also regarding a number of other issues, especially issues that have to do with liberal Judaism, liberal orthodoxy. So there's a few Tshuvos that seem to side with liberal orthodoxy, and this has also caused a stir amongst the students who say that we can't rely on this volume. In any event, bottom line is that the majority of Peskei Zmanenu, of today's Peskim, are in agreement that electrical appliances would nonetheless be Kli Shemalach D'Le'issa, and that's how we would treat it. We're going to begin now the subject of Muktzah Machmas Gufay, which is one of our last categories of Muktzah. The next page, as you see. And this is a category that's as severe as the category of Muktzah Machmas Chesron Kiss, of which we rule that it cannot be moved for any purpose. We're going to see this inside and then give a whole bunch of examples. So we're in Shin Ches 308, Sif Ches. We're in over there. No, we're past that, way past that. Keep going, keep going.
This one, yes?
Keep going. What page is it?
321.
Okay. The chos b'dov sheish teres kli alav avakada v'shein teres kli alav ve'ena ma'ichala dov l'mach be'em kanavonu mois ve'etzim koinim v'kayis v'achol v'kemach ve'isa she'yisah v'shalachim yesh matim k'zvosim shin yud v'ameis u'ba'alei chaim k'loketz v'omegu afilu dov v'shuroi l'shtamesh be'ezeh tashma mutter b'shaz kanavodim shurin l'vtzoi b'hamagayis v'vtzoi yishuris l'chaz b'mkeim Halkets and Kimishin to us clear lame, also tat feel so goofen, McCaim after LRP Adosh is Barbas only Kamux Machasku. So the Alter Rebbe here in Sirches introduces it's based on the Mechaber, in his Shulchan Aruch, based on the opinions of the Rishonim and on the Gemara, in Shabbos Daf Mem Vav, page 46a, that we have another category of Muktzah, which we mentioned here and there, and this is now we're going into the full details of, which is called Muktzah Machmas Gufay, which literally is translated as Muktzah due to itself, due to its own body. Meaning that it's not Muktzah due to that it's designated for a prohibited purpose, as is Kli Shemalach D'Le'issa, or Muktzah Machmas Chesron Kiss, that since it has designated for prohibited purpose, it can't be done on Shabbos, and it has no other use, because you're particular with it, so therefore it's Muktzah due to something external. This is Muktzah in and of itself, due to its own bodily dimensions. What falls under such a category? Anything that does not have a Teiras Kli. Let's get this concept down. What? Teiras Kli. The Torah or the status of a Kli of a vessel. Anything that does not have a Teiras Kli, the status of a vessel, is considered Muktzah Machmas Gufay. And he lists here a whole bunch of examples.
Torah is status of, not Torah? Torah.
Correct. Teres in this terminology, in this context, refers to status. Okay, and he gives here examples such as food that's not edible to humans and not edible to animals, meaning it's not food. Anything that's not edible for humans or animals, such as stones, money, pieces of wood, bamboo, beams, dirt, sand, flour. Even though flour is food in its current state, it's an inedible food. Dough, also inedible. A dead body, animals.
Car, a building.
A car is a clue.
Okay, it's a clue, I see.
A building is certainly, it's a structure.
Stone isn't the clue.
You don't see a difference between everything we mentioned in the two examples you gave?
Mine's starting to hone in on the distinction here. Okay. Stone.
All of these materials we said are raw materials that have not yet made it into use for society.
Okay.
Seeds.
Raw material.
Seeds.
Inedible seeds.
Inedible seeds, yes.
Right.
But pits of fruits,
Shells
of nuts, pebbles, etc., etc. I think we could come up with 1,000 things on this list.
Orange
Basically,
peeling is
we're going to
fit
go through. So
for
orange
animals?
peels we'll go into. Right, so we're going to go into a number of different factors that need to be clarified based on this. The basic rule is understood. What we need to go into is what's the definition of not fit for humans, not fit for animals. When is something fit for animals not considered muktzah? What about bones on your Shabbos table? If you had a dog, he would be more than happy to enjoy the bone. Doesn't mean that the bone is not muktzah. And other cases we're going to go through in Hashem. Okay, so let's begin with foods. So the halacha by animal foods is that any food that humans do not eat, but animals do eat this food, then this food is not considered muktzah if the animals are found in the vicinity of the area. Any food which is not edible for humans, let's use bones as an example. Bones, humans are not chopping down the chicken bones usually, or the meat bones, unless they have marrow, and if humans do eat it, then it's fine, it's not muktzah. But let's say marrowless bones, the humans do not eat, they give to dogs or to other animals, throw in the garbage. So it is edible to an animal. If the animals are found in the vicinity, then it would not be muktzah. Let's see this in Shin Shim Ches, Sif Samach Daled. All foods that are fit to be eaten by animals, whether it be birds or wild animals, it is permitted to be moved. Even if it's not fit for the majority of animals, such as chatzav is a type of animal fodder. It's only fit for deer, chardal and mustard. I guess raw mustard, which is only edible by the doves, pigeons. Mutul talkim is permitted to move where b'makim shatzloim v'ayonim mitzvim, in areas that they are commonly found. The hainu, which means the makim shadef stam b'den legadim legim b'kach loydam ashutzir tzasam b'van. It has to be found enough that the typical population of the city owns these animals, owns these pets, and it's not enough just for the aristocrats to have them.
Is it closed upstairs? I don't know. It is. Here's an opening right here. You can go up there with this. That door goes upstairs. Yeah, you can go up there from there right now. Yes.
So the rule here is clear.
But we have pigeons on our porch.
So the rule here is clear. We are referring to animals that are being raised by humans. So to have a city that has a rat problem and a cat problem and a wild dog problem, that won't make it or break it regarding whether the food is muktzah or not. Why? For a very simple reason. Ein achilasam alecha. Their food is not dependent on you. We don't intentionally need to provide them their food. We unintentionally do by having garbage. That's why they're found in populated areas, because they enjoy food from the garbage. But nonetheless, they are not on our minds, and since they're not on our minds, they can't be counted towards this process of unmuktzing, such a word, okay, items that are not edible for humans but edible to animals. The whole idea of muktzah is that it's off my mind. So if I don't have any animals that I care about, and there are no animals in the vicinity that people raise, which they feed these foods to, so it's considered off the mind of the population of the city. And therefore, such foods would not be permitted to be moved on Shabbos. They would be considered muktzah, even though technically someone can sit down with you and tell you, well, a Rottweiler would eat this bone, and a canine would eat that bone. Doesn't matter. If you're not around, people don't raise them, it wouldn't help.
And in spot where people feed the cats
So
stuff.
it doesn't matter. They're still not considered that we are responsible for feeding. We're not responsible for feeding. We've discussed in Beila Halacha. It's also a shaila if people are even allowed to do that, as they are causing the cats to come back and be around and cause a nuisance for the population. Just because they feel animal rights and they feel bad does not give them a right to infringe the community policies where they want to keep wildlife out of the streets. And therefore, if they care so much, let them pay for the cat to have a shelter and be brought up in a nice, beautiful shelter, and that'll solve everyone's problems. But to feed animals, wild animals over the street is not okay because it infringes on the will of the community where they don't want wildlife running around.
So that makes the status of the previous scenario you just said.
So we wouldn't count wild cats and dogs into our equation here. Only animals that are raised by people. So Tzfas, as well as many other cities, in fact, I think every big city in the world raises dogs today. Unless you're a small town, dogs aren't really found. Or usually also a Haredi town doesn't really have dogs. There's not that many of them in the world, but those that are, there aren't really that many dogs around. So bones would be muktzah. You can't rely on the fact that there's wild dogs in the street. However, certainly in Tzfas and almost every other major city where the population raises dogs, so foods that dogs eat would not be muktzah, even if you don't personally own a dog. Because in this city, this bone is considered food. It's viewed as food for animals. Okay, so the same applies for leftover peels. It applies to anything that's inedible. As I said to you, will be eaten by these animals that are found.
Now, if a human, because of certain health practices, would eat an orange peel.
Right, so inedible foods that people decide to eat, it would have seemingly the same status as all muktzah matmas gufa, which is that if he sets it aside before Shabbos for the purpose of doing whatever he wants to do with it, then it would be mutter. We find this regarding raw fish, even though, as we will list very soon, raw fish is considered muktzah on Shabbos. Those who eat sushi, we're not going to tell them it's us for you to eat sushi on Shabbos because it's raw fish. Rather, since it's been set aside already and prepared for the purpose of eating,
On Shabbos.
therefore, it's considered to be designated for a use, just like anything can be designated and be removed from its muktzah machos gufei status. But this halacha that we just learned about peels and shells, practically, since we don't exactly know what type of animals are raised in our city, and even if we do, we don't typically know what foods they will eat and not eat, so it's a little tricky to know. How do you know that, this specific inedible, let's say we're dealing with shells or peels, will be eaten by dogs, by typical dogs, and they are fed to dogs? We don't. So with bones, I think we can assume that dogs eat bones, right? Mm-hmm. All dogs.
Chicken meat.
What about chicken bones? Also, chicken bones. Okay. So people that raise cats and dogs, it's raised by the population. So on Shabbos, they would not be muktzah. They would be allowed to be moved since they are given to. Does anyone know if people actually give their leftover bones to the dogs and cats today? Right?
Yes.
You've seen it?
Yes.
I don't remember. We used to have a dog. I don't remember ever doing it. In Miami,
This happened recently.
we always bought him food. We bought him bones. We threw out our bones. Okay. But on Yantif, as we'll learn later on, it would be forbidden. This is a special heter only for Shabbos. as on Shabbos, we have a leniency regarding noilot, something that took a new purpose on Shabbos. Until in the midst of Shabbos, this was a food serving the chicken or the meat, and now it's become a bone for a dog. So on Shabbos, we don't have a problem with it, but on Yantif, it's considered noilot and will be muktzah. So this idea that the bones will not be muktzah would only be applicable on Shabbos, not on Yantif.
Eating the chicken would consider giving birth to a bone? On
Correct. Well, yeah, so that's only if you know how to eat the chicken and the meat really well, that you don't leave any leftover meat or chicken on the bone. But if you leave a little bit of meat still on the bone or chicken, then technically it's still edible. It still has fruit on it. It still has meat on it. So it's still, the bone is still bottled to the meat. It's only in a case where it's been pretty much finished off that it would end up being muktzah on Yom Tif.
So it's a nullet issue, because obviously the bones are also edible to the edible ones that you make it, that you cancel out the muktzah.
Right, but I went from being a human food to a dog food. Understand?
That's the birth.
That's the birth that on Yom Tif we would have a problem with, but not on Shabbos.
So
So bottom line is that outside of bones, pretty much, unless it's been verified otherwise, everything else that's in all the other inedibles and leftovers, such as pits, shells, peels, would need to be dealt with and treated like actual muktzah. Which would mean, like muktzah machmas gufis, they are inedible. So
highest
this would
level
mean-
muktzah, right? Which you said highest
Yeah,
level.
they're battling with muktzah machmas chisar and kiss for the title.
Shinui is allowed with highest level?
Always. Shina is always allowed.
Always allowed.
Always allowed. Shina, you can always do with the irregularity. So bottom line is like this. We're going to learn later on exactly how to deal with these leftovers, but we already mentioned now that the best idea is not to enter into a situation where you would need to move these things on Shabbos. And therefore, a simple example, you're peeling an orange, peeling a fruit with an inedible peel, do it in the garbage. Why create muktzah on your table and then need to resort to one of the other hatam we're going to learn later on to need to move it?
So as you're pulling off the orange peel, before it hits the garbage, you have it sort of independent in your hand.
So obviously, while it's still attached to the fruit, it's not a problem at all. It only becomes muktzah once it separates from the fruit and has been dropped from your hand, then it becomes muktzah.
Okay.
But until then, it's still considered bottled, nullified to the fruit, and therefore, even though shells are muktzah, it is not considered a problem to hold a nut with a shell on Shabbos. Even according to Chabad custom not to eat nuts within their shells on Shabbos, there's no problem to hold the nut. Because the nut is not muktzah, there is fruit inside.
Or peel it off and stick it in the garbage immediately. As soon as it leaves your hand into the garbage, you're okay. But it was in your hand, it was a free fall for a moment. It was sitting there.
It's not a
independent.
problem,
Okay.
because
No.
you did it in a permitted way. Okay, so let's go through some raw food cases. So in the Shulchan Aruch, we find a lot of different...
Eggshells also.
Right, eggshells are certainly not muktzah. Except the truth is here and downstairs, they serve it by the kiddush. it's
Whole
like
eggs?
calcium.
Whole eggs? They do?
You haven't seen them?
You see that there's egg
With the
salad.
shells?
I don't remember.
You haven't seen eggshells in the shul?
Oh, in the chol and one maybe.
You still have to peel
They
them.
designate it as food.
Because it's part of the chol.
Uh-huh.
It's part of the chol.
People eat it, right?
I guess
People
so.
don't eat the shells.
The shells? I don't know.
I've seen.
Yeah.
I've seen. I mean, I try not to, but I've seen.
A little bit here and there. But, yeah.
Some of the raised dogs or cat would eat the shells, it'd be okay.
Eggshells are muktzah. Unless somebody, I don't know, they're taking, they're eating shells for the calcium or whatever it is that they find beneficial.
Even if
So
an animal
they
would eat
designate
them?
it.
Even one of the raised animals would eat them? It doesn't.
If it's determined that animals that are commonly raised in this city do eat eggshells and are fed eggshells, and you're right, it wouldn't be muktzah, but I don't think that that's the case.
Okay.
We have to have someone that will do a whole research on all the types of animals in the city and what are the foods that they are commonly fed, that they commonly eat in the city, and then we can factually determine what will not enter the muktzah category. Okay, so let's begin. The law with raw food. So we're going to go through a whole bunch of raw foods here. We already mentioned some of them in the previous halach in Sivches in halacha 8, and we're going to go through some more that are discussed. And a very important clarification is necessary here. The idea that a food is edible for animals that are found in the vicinity and therefore demotes it from its muktzah status only applies if the intended purpose of this food is to reach the animal's mouth. In other words, you're not saving it for yourself. You're not saving these bones to sell. You're not saving these bones to, I don't know, to make a new pot, a bone material pot. It's going to go to animals. But if the purpose of this food, which is edible to animals even on Shabbos in your vicinity, is not to be fed to the animals, but rather to be saved for something else, we wouldn't enter animals into the equation, and our only equation would be, is this currently edible to humans or not? So let's begin. Meat. Meat which is raw, that's not fit for human consumption, is completely muktzah on Shabbos, even if animals can eat it. And the reason for that is because it's considered designated for human consumption. Let's see this inside.
It's completely muktzah, you said?
What about those people who...
Muktzah machas kufu.
Okay, but the person who normally eats raw meat...
Which there are some of whom there are some.
Yeah, a lot of people. There are people that do. They're putting it aside before Shabbos to eat on Shabbos is not a problem. Correct?
Okay, so we're going to see inside that there is tender raw meat, soft raw meat, is edible by some people. Okay, the Alter Rebbe calls them the Tznine Hadas. I translate that here as cool-headed. I don't know if that's the best translation.
What'd you call it?
Cool-headed.
Cool?
Cool.
Oh, cool.
Not cool people, but
Raw-headed.
Raw-headed. Anyways, so we're going to read this inside regarding tender meat, that there are people who would eat raw. Certainly, we can apply chicken. I don't know of anyone who eats raw chicken, and that would certainly fall into our definition here. Let's see it inside. Samaches. Basar chai. You see, we're in the beginning the law of raw foods in the book. Basar chai filu tafel sheina meluach klal. Mutulat outway. Raw meat, which has not even been salted yet for its blood, so it still contains its blood. Mutter latat is permitted to be moved as it's still fit to be eaten by people. As there's some people which don't mind daitem yafa. Their minds are okay with the idea of chewing on raw meat.
Really? What about the blood factor? The blood factor doesn't discount it because you can't eat blood?
There it's explained that blood that is absorbed within a piece of raw meat and has not yet been extracted through salting is permitted to be eaten. The only reason why we need to salt meat for blood is because we plan on cooking the meat. And if we cook it, what's going to happen? The blood inside the meat is going to leave and then go back. Blood which moves location is prohibited to be consumed by a Jew. Blood which stays in its nest, where it originally was when it was shechted, is allowed to be eaten. So you cannot squeeze a piece of meat and drink the blood because it just left. But you can eat a piece of raw meat with its blood, so long as it's raw and is not cooked. Also roasted. You can roast a piece of meat, and you can then go ahead and eat it, even if not all of its blood left.
Roasting takes it out.
Roasting doesn't take it out.
Only if you leave for a certain amount of time. So I said, even if you didn't leave it for enough time for all its blood to leave, it would still didn't be mutter, because it's no different than eating a piece of raw meat with its absorbed blood that has not moved location. Okay. However, hard meat, or let's just interpret this as any meat which is not fit to be moved. And so to any food, such as raw fat, even though it's fit for dogs, nonetheless, they are not fit to be eaten by dogs, but rather for people. Shabbos, or the Shabbos and therefore on Shabbos they have no purpose. For animals that are found in the vicinity which would gladly dig into them, we don't plan on giving it. For humans on Shabbos, it's not ready to eat. It's not edible. So therefore these items are completely muktzah. That is the logic behind it. Bottom line.
You're going to cook it after Shabbos? The Jew's going to cook it after Shabbos and make it edible for himself?
Even though it's going to become edible after Shabbos.
By cooking it.
Yes, since now on Shabbos it is inedible, therefore it retains a completely muktzah prohibition. So this is basically qualifying the heter of fit for animals to only be, as I said, in a case that it's meant for animals. If it's meant for humans, then it wouldn't have any lesser of a status of muktzah, just because animals would be more than happy to eat it in their vicinity.
Doesn't matter if the humans don't want the fat. Cooked or not.
Now, the poskim explain that today people are it's no longer as common for people to eat raw meat. I know there still are some anomalies, there are still some people who do so, but for the most part people don't eat raw meat, and therefore it wouldn't even enter into the category here of sheyesh b'nei adam shadaitim yafa. In other words, the amount of people who used to eat raw meat back in the day was so much higher than the amount of people who do so today. And therefore, for whatever reason. And therefore, because of this, they rule that all raw meat today is considered muktzah, unless a person designated it before Shabbos for the purpose of eating, and then it would be no different than raw fish or anything else.
Who updated that? Who made that decision?
Which poskim?
Yeah.
This is a tshuva of Rav Vosner and Shevet Halevi on this.
How modern a time is that?
He passed away a few years ago.
Ah, very modern.
Spoiled meat is no longer edible for humans. People aren't going to eat it anymore. If there are dogs in the vicinity that are raised by people, then spoiled meat is not muktzah on Shabbos, as it is fit to give to dogs to eat. They would be more than happy to eat the spoiled meat.
We have many neighbors around that have, not so many neighbors around, but there are people that do raise dogs, so you're allowed.
Right, so that's what I said. It's fast, like pretty much every major city in the world, you would be allowed to move these things because there are plenty of dogs who will be fed these things. Raw fish. Sif samach tes. Dag maluach mutal tatel shein maluach asu. Salted fish is permitted to be moved on Shabbos. It is not muktzah as it is edible. In other words, herring. However, raw fish that has not been cured, that has not been treated, that has not been salted, is forbidden. In other words, the Alter Rebbe here is placing, not the Alter Rebbe, this is the Gemara, a sushi ban on Shabbos.
A what?
A sushi ban. Not banned, ban, B-A-N.
Yeah.
As it's not fit for any person. And you're certainly not planning on giving this fish to the dogs. You plan on cooking it after Shabbos. So therefore it is not muktzah. So therefore it's muktzah, completely muktzah. Now, in this case scenario, we have to take into account what's going on. Today we have plenty of sushi eaters. The Japanese and Orientals have influenced the world to join their cuisine. But just be aware in history of sushi that in the times of the Shulchan Aruch, going 200-300 years back, Japanese cuisine still did not infiltrate the West. People did not yet eat it. It only became something more recent. In the 1900s that people began eating raw fish. And I can also assume, by the way, that most Jews did not live in Japan. Right? Good assumption. Because otherwise, they always lost their cuisine. They would eat raw fish. So they didn't live in these areas that serve sushi. Bottom line today, the halach is as we said before. People today who do eat it, it's now become the status of a food. If it's become the status of a food, therefore it is not muktzah. Now, in pretty much every major city, you have a sushi restaurant. Now, sushi can be made in one of two ways. It can be done using absolutely raw flesh of the fish, or the flesh can be a little cured with salt, with other things that help cure the flesh of the fish. So if the fish is cured, and that's the type of sushi people are eating, then that's not real sushi. That's not what we're referring to here. Here we said explicitly, if it's cured fish, then it's edible. It's not muktzah. Here we're talking about completely raw fish. Nonetheless, once again, we have to go with the logic. And the logic is that if people have begun eating it, even though this wasn't the reality back in the times that this was written, therefore it has now been reinstated into a food. Personally, I will not move raw fish on Shabbos, and I also will not eat raw fish during the week. However, including sushi raw fish. However, those people who do, they would certainly be allowed to eat raw fish sushi on Shabbos, as it's considered a food for them. The question is, maybe it's considered a food also for me, since I have neighbors that are humans, and they eat raw fish, they eat sushi. So just like we said before, if you have neighbors who grow dogs, who raise dogs, and I have a bone, even though I don't have a dog in my house, the bone is not muktzah since it's considered a food of a human. So while the logic here does seem to point in this direction, the Rabbanus has not yet updated it to that level, and if you take a look at all the Svarim, everyone writes raw fish is muktzah on Shabbos. And they don't even go into the sushi. Even some of the more modern Svarim, they don't start mentioning that the sushi revolution may have changed this halacha. And one Rav who I brought this up to, and I said, I think you should, at least put a footnote in your sefer, at least, update it for the sushi eaters. So he said, the Alter Rebbe writes, it's not fit for any person. Any real shum adam. People who eat raw fish, they're not adam.
They're not what? They're not men?
You're saying a joke. They're not real people. He never heard of such a thing. He thought I was making it up that people eat raw fish. It wasn't. He's never been to a sushi restaurant.
If they did interject now an update, and they said because it's a common thing that people eat.
Certainly for people that eat sushi, they can serve sushi on Shabbos.
That's not a problem because you're putting it aside anyway before Shabbos to be made.
Correct. Even if you didn't, even if the fish was in your fridge and you're preparing the sushi now on Shabbos.
But you had in mind, it was bought for that purpose.
Yeah. It's a people who eat the fish raw, so it's considered a food.
So in other words, even though it hasn't been updated officially in Svarim, you're saying that because of the actual guidelines and rules, it would be permitted if you set it aside.
Correct. Certainly for the sushi eaters, and there's room to learn even for the non-sushi eaters, even those who don't eat raw fish, it would be mutter based on what we're saying here, that that raw meat is not muktzah back in the day because so many people ate raw meat. So if today so many people eat raw fish, and therefore also wouldn't be muktzah. Now, I don't know.
The meat's been updated.
The meat's been updated that, on the opposite, that it's all muktzah because people today don't eat it. No, most people today don't eat raw meat. One thing is clear is that all the examples brought in the laws of muktzah are all examples due to the rules. And therefore, if any aspect of the example changes, then the halacha would change based on the rules. It's not set in stone. It's a result of the rule. But once again, I would not move raw fish on Shabbos.
Personal preference, you're saying that halacha?
It says raw fish is muktzah. I'm going to treat it as muktzah.
So where's
people who eat raw fish, okay, gesundheit. Plus, I don't know if every type of raw fish can be used for sushi. Do people eat every type of raw fish in the world? Is every kosher raw fish eaten in sushi?
A lot of them, but I don't know if everyone. A lot of them.
Well,
6, 7, 8.
if there's even one that isn't, if this is the one, it's muktzah. People don't eat it.
That one would be muktzah, yeah. That one would be muktzah, yeah.
So we need to have a list of which foods are commonly eaten in your city as raw sushi.
So where is the overlay coming from that you said would allow it ultimately, sort of technically according to the rules?
According to the rules, if let's say tuna, people eat raw tuna or raw salmon, not cured, not lox, then according to the rules, since people eat it in the city, it would no longer be considered muktzah.
Okay, I'm getting at the detail of you're saying that just based on reasoning, but you said it's not in the Svarim yet. So who really approves it other than you're bringing up that it's okay within the technical rules, but it hasn't been updated, so it's not updated yet. And officially, is it really allowed? It's a little confusing.
It is allowed because we go by the rules.
Okay. It's your interpretation of the rules, basically. You're saying.
No, but everyone agrees that's the rule.
Oh, they all agree.
Everyone agrees the rule is that if it's eaten by people, then it turns into a food.
So how come somebody hasn't written it somewhere, some rabbi hasn't made it official and writing it down?
I already told you, people aren't updated with the sushi world. The one rabbi told him he didn't believe me. There are people who eat raw fish. He didn't believe me. He said they're wild men. They're tribal men. They're not real, and we don't take them into account. Doesn't realize there's sushi restaurants in every city today. Even little Tzfas has a sushi restaurant.
Yeah. That's not drink.
Right. But that's for during the week.
Yeah.
The other alternative is to... No, a lot of them do write it's mutter to eat sushi on Shabbos. It's very funny. They write you can eat sushi on Shabbos, but then they write in a few chapters in the laws of muktzah that raw fish is muktzah. So either you don't know what sushi is, or you haven't updated the section of muktzah. Or you're saying you're eating with a shinoi.
You do that. Eat with a shinoi. That's funny.
Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, you wrap with the seaweed.
Because the issue is the moving of it, right? The eating of it is the eating of it. It's the moving of it. If you could eat it without moving it, no, you can't do that. Swallowing it is moving it.
And, you know,
Okay, but even if you get it into your mouth like that, once you do it in your mouth...
eating is not is a shinoi, yeah.
Eating is a shinoi. So if you got it in your mouth with a shinoi, the
But then
swallowing
if you eat it, your body becomes a buses to the muktzah. And you can't move your body.
move your body.
You have to stay mobile.
To meditate.
Immobile, the whole Shabbos. That was a joke. Okay.
That's all on tape.
Okay, moving along. Grains and flour. So let's see this inside regarding their muktzah status.
Backwards here.
Is it there? You see it?
It's back here.
The new edition will move some things around.
It's here. Yeah. Page before.
Okay, bottom line is like this.
323.
It's explained in the Alter Rebbe writes in Shimon Shin Lamed Gimel, Sif Aleph, also the Mechaber and other poskim, that flour is muktzah on Shabbos. Okay, so flour clearly. I'm sorry, this is Shin Chafei Sif Vav, and Shin Ches Sif Ches. We already read it inside. The flour is muktzah on Shabbos. And the reason is, of course, because flour is not edible in its current state. It only becomes edible once it becomes turned into a food, into a baked product, etc. Therefore, it would have its muktzah state. Now, what about grains? Wheat, barley, oats. Grains.
Well, animals feed on raw grains, right?
But who was it designated for? Remember what we said?
Okay, so
Who was this? When you have a grain cabinet, many people have cabinets in their homes which houses the legumes and the grains, that they, rice, buckwheat, wheat, barley, oats, rye, spelt, etc., etc. What's the status of all that stuff? So the initial reaction should be it's muktzah. Nobody eats that stuff plain. You need to cook it. You need to cook it, you need to bake it, you need to prepare it. So it's muktzah. That would be the rule. So it's very surprising to see. Let's see one example, 325.6, where we see the following written down.
Good.
stupid. Why is it like a bone?
That's what we're saying. It should be, right? That's what we should
A
assume.
bone that animals would eat that are raised in the city is not muktzah because there's an animal in the city that's raised that could eat a bone. Why aren't the
No,
bones?
because I said before, we only enter animals into the factor of denoting from muktzah if it's meant and designated for them.
Them first.
Who's going to be eating this? Who's designated to partake in this food? You. You're saving it, right?
The bone would never.
Mustard seeds.
They're meant for human consumption. We plan on using them.
You mentioned mustard seeds in particular.
Yeah, that's when it's designated for animals. But if it's not designated for animals, then... Let's see, 333. Shin Lamed Gimel Halacha 1. The Alter Rebbe here writes in 333, one place in the ruling of the Mechaber, another place. He writes here explicitly, a storage house, what they call what's the English word with an S? A silo. Thank you. A silo of grain is not considered muktzah on Shabbos. And he repeats this idea as well in Shin Chaf Hey and other places, basically saying that grains are not muktzah, and we ask and wonder why not. What happened here? So what is revealed is that in another area that Alter Rebbe writes, in chapter 5:17, he writes the reason. And what is the reason? The reason is, as people chew on these grains, they eat them whether roasted or raw. So it seems, and I did look this up, that grains can be chewed, and there used to be people who would chew on barley and spit it or swallow it. People don't do this anymore today. And the question would be asked, perhaps we need to update this, and since people no longer eat barley or raw, that it would therefore enter into a complete muksa status. Practically, halacha l'maaseh, since today we don't see people anymore eating these foods raw, and the reason has changed, therefore it should be treated as completely muktzah. The person who wants to move it should move it with the shina. All this was discussing the 5 grains that can become hamaitzi and mezainis. All the other legumes are written exclusively elsewhere that they are considered muktzah, and therefore there's no room to be lenient by that.
So the 5 grains are like the meat, the raw meat now. It's been updated. So no, the other way. No.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, outside the 5 grains, it's like meat, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not.
But how could you roast them on Shabbos?
That's why they're muktzah.
But it's not muktzah.
5 grains.
I understand. In Hilchos Yantif.
No, I'm talking about wheat.
Yeah.
Wheat
I'll tell you
grains.
right, in Hilchos Yantif.
That.
517, Tavkuf Yudayim. But the reason that the grains are not muktzah on Yantif is because they can be roasted. And there are a lot of roast on Yantif. But that reason is not applicable on Shabbos. And therefore, the only reason applicable on Shabbos is that they can be eaten raw. But that's not done today. So just like flour is muktzah, and just like the actual dough is muktzah, so too, the grain will be muktzah, as what can you do with it on Shabbos if it's not anymore considered an edible food?
So all the grains, including the 5 grains, would be the same status then?
Correct.
What was the distinction we're making about the 5 grains then? That was in the old day? What was the 5 grain
That
distinction?
people ate it. We have to be open to the idea that our cuisine and how we would eat foods has changed over the years.
And they don't eat it anymore, even the 5 grains
Correct.
raw. So
Some foods we don't eat anymore, and some foods that they didn't eat, we do eat. And therefore, the rules always stay the same. The examples that have been written into law are a result of the rules. And therefore, if something changes with them, as I said before, they would follow the other rule.
And raw pasta.
Raw pasta as well. It's not something that people generally eat. Just because you can make an argument that you can eat raw pasta. In every class I've taught this regarding pasta, there's always been at least one person to raise their hand and say, well, I eat raw pasta. One of those weird people. There's always been one. So I said, you know.
Better examples, cookies, raw cookie dough.
Raw cookie dough.
People eat raw cookie dough. There's even the flavors of the ice cream that include raw cookie.
Right. So once again, if it's been designated already for a food, then it's okay. So if this raw pasta eater before Shabbos takes a bag of raw pasta and says, I am designating this for my chewing, my enjoyment on Shabbos, so okay, no problem. But it wouldn't affect most of the world. We need a large size of the population to begin eating these foods for these things to start becoming, coming out of the muktzah category. And because raw pasta is something that most people do not eat raw, it's something that has to be cooked. It's not something generally done. Therefore, it would remain muktzah.
I suppose one test is if it's commercially sold for that to be eaten away.
How many people eat it in its current state? That's our question. How many people eat it in its current state?
Generally not eaten in its current state, then those people it's muktzah for, and the one who has a peculiarity like eating pasta, that wouldn't be muktzah for them as long as it's set it aside.
Correct. Yeah, just like everything else.
Start doing surveys.
Well, as long as you want to eat pasta, it's all good.
Okay.
The worms and the sushi that are put aside eat the pasta for dessert inside the belly. Sorry, too graphic. I'm a sushi eater. I didn't mean to make fun of sushi. Or eater.
should we move on to next? Okay, so let's, here in my new edition, I don't think it's in the old edition.
Statements.
It went straight to, from here, it goes straight to rainwater. What's next in the book over here?
Let's see.
I know which direction you're
We've
going.
got raisins and dates.
Oh, okay, we're gonna skip that. That's a long subject, not relevant for practical halacha right now. We can skip that.
Laws of foods that have been set aside from being eaten, designated to be sold.
Okay, so we'll get to that after. Fine, we'll get to that after. In the meantime, let's just focus in the meantime on the raw foods. We have one food that's left, and that is water. Water is obviously not muktzah. What about rainwater? Is rainwater considered muktzah? And for that matter, snow as well. So, it's not. It's in the new edition. It's not.
This is the new edition, isn't it?
No, well, this new edition wasn't printed yet.
Oh, okay.
The new 2B edition
Oh, okay.
coming out this summer. God willing.
This summer?
That's a shame. See what happens. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe writes in Siman Shin Lamed Ches 338 Halacha 9 that rainwater that is clean and drinkable by humans is not muktzah. Why would it be? It's water. It's drinkable water. However, dirty rainwater, like water that's coming out of the dirty gutter, is muktzah because people won't drink it. So that's the differentiation that we have. The rainwater is dependent on its cleanliness status and whether it can be drunk or not. This would affect us regarding snow. What would be the status regarding snow, and is snow considered muktzah? So, snow is basically the same idea as rainwater. It would not be considered muktzah, even if it fell on Shabbos, as it's perfectly usable for eating or drinking, for humans, for animals. It's also can be used for bathing. And, however, this would only apply if the snow is clean. If, however, the snow is dirty, if it's dirty snow, which happens, the snow gets dirty, then it would be muktzah, because it's no longer able to be used for that purpose. There was a pasuk who ruled that snow that falls on Shabbos is considered muktzah, and he says it's muktzah because of the concept of noilad, that it's considered reborn. It wasn't around before Shabbos, and now on Shabbos we have a birth of this. And this is not a regular noilad that we said is permitted on Shabbos, like the bones of meat. The bones were around. It's basically its function changed. It turned into being human food to being animal. Here, the snow wasn't around before Shabbos at all, and therefore they want to say that perhaps snow that falls on Shabbos is muktzah. This is one of the psakim of Rav Moshe in that controversial volume, contradicting once again one of his previous rulings elsewhere. That's another reason why, as I said.
It doesn't matter whether you're going to use it eventually to eat it. With the snow, even if you're not going to put it in your mouth, it's considered muktzah because you wouldn't.
Well, first of all, you will, because the drinking water that you will be drinking out of your faucet will have snow that infiltrated into it, without doubt. If you're receiving from the Kinneret, without question, you're receiving rainwater and snow water, which I've always marveled at, that you have some people who, view rainwater and snow as, it's disgusting. How can you eat that stuff? If you ever went diving inside of your pipes, you would never drink again from your pipes. I mean, do you know what's in the pipes? This is straight from God, this stuff. Clean, clear.
Doesn't get filtered anyway?
What?
Oh, it does get filtered, you're saying.
Where does it get filtered? Look inside the faucet of your sink. What's inside there? Is it appetizing?
I don't know. The water doesn't taste awful. Anyway, it's filtered though.
So the point is that when you don't see, when you things that you're used to, you can just go ahead and, eat them, even though when you go into the source of it, they're not the cleanest that they can be. A lot of the mineral water that we buy, they're getting it there. That's it's natural. It's coming from springs. It's coming through the.
You don't have to stop
through the earth.
The more sure though. Rain, mikvah water that comes
Bottom
from the
line.
rain. Mikvah water.
Snow and rain that falls on Shabbos, the poskim rule is not considered muktzah if it's not dirty, and therefore you are allowed to move snow out of the way using your hand. Making snowball snowmen is a different story that already enters question of boina, other malachas. But to move it away is definitely not a problem.
And mikvah water, what is that, what mikvah water fit into
The
this?
mikveh water?
Yeah,
Well, it's fit for bathing. It's not fit for drinking.
so that,
It's fit for bathing.
so meaning, you can obviously swish around and move water when you go to the mikvah.
Yes, so you are allowed to enter.
Because it's fit for
into-
bathing. Okay.
Correct. It's fit for mikveh, that's what it's designated for.
Okay, I'm gonna just switch off the light on the thing, so we only have 2 minutes, we'll get in trouble if we don't do that. And,
So next week, we're gonna continue with,
open up for Tuesday night, or for Tuesday, you know, I just get something going to write.
Right.
Next week we'll continue
Put that
with,
back in there for me.
Next week, we're gonna continue with foods. We're gonna deal with foods that are, have kashrus prohibition,
Upper left, put that in that phone, sorry, the transition.
and other cases of muksanach masuka.